Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to a new episode of our Letter to Vox podcast.
Today, we are undertaking a massive deep dive into a text so foundational, so revolutionary, that the moment it was published in 1762, authorities across Europe just condemned it.
They were seizing copies, publicly burning them in Paris and Geneva. It was a huge scandal.
A huge scandal. And we are, of course, cracking open Jean Jacques Rousseau's Emile, or On Education.
It is truly a text that, in many ways defined modernity.
Yeah.
And when you look at the source material we have, the scope is it's staggering.
It really is. I think our mission for this deep dive has to be analyzing Rousseau's, his radical prescriptions for human development.
Right.
How exactly does he propose to extract this natural man from the confines and corruptions of civil society? What does that education actually look like?
From the very beginning, from infancy all the way to marriage.
The whole journey.
I was struck immediately by his self-assessment in the preface. He admits this colossal volume started as just a short essay.
For a good thinking mother, he says.
Exactly. But the subject matter, he says, it just dragged him along. He felt that while the final work is huge, it's still, and I quote, not extensive enough for the subject.
He realized he was creating something much bigger, a new social contract, but for the individual soul.
And this sense of importance, it comes from his initial just blistering critique of the world around him.
Absolutely. Rousseau begins with this really powerful statement of conflict. The current methods of education are rooted in a harmful influence.
He sees this widespread outcry against established practice, but he says modern thinkers are more focused on destroying than building.
And that's the key. He wasn't content to just tear down the old system. He felt he had to provide the complete blueprint for building a better human being.
To understand the blueprint, though, we have to understand the architect. So before we get lost in Emile's childhood, let's just establish who Jean Jacques Rousseau was.
Jean Jacques Rousseau. He was an absolutely essential figure of the 18th century Enlightenment, born in Geneva in 1712.
And what makes him so pivotal? What's the core idea?
I think it's his revolutionary conviction that man is born inherently good, pure, and free.
But society corrupts him.
But society, its institutions, its customs, its dependencies, it corrupts him. So his works, like The Social Contract and this one, Emile, they're an attempt to reconcile that natural freedom with, the necessity of civil life.
So Emile is his solution to the corruption problem.
It is. It's his attempt to solve it through a rigorous, almost obsessively controlled pedagogical practice to make sure the child develops naturally before being introduced to society's constraints.
And his solution begins with defining the sources of our experience. He says every person is formed by three different teachers. What are they?
Okay, so they are nature, men, and things.
Nature, men, and things.
Right. Nature is all about the internal development of our organs and abilities, the spontaneous growth of the biological self.
Okay.
Men provide the instruction on how to use those developments, the lessons passed down by adults. And things provide that crucial interaction with the external world.
So like resistance, consequences.
Exactly. The raw experience of objects.
The ultimate goal, then, is perfect coordination between the three.
Yes, and you are poorly educated if these three teachings counteract each other. True harmony, he says, is only achieved when they are all directed toward the same ends.
But he thinks achieving this in the modern world is, basically impossible.
It's the great tragedy he's addressing,
Exactly.
the central conflict of this impossible dualism.
Dualism, okay.
Rousseau argues that you cannot simultaneously prioritize natural feelings and exist fully in civil society without being perpetually psychologically torn. The two forces demand opposite allegiance.
So if you try to live half natural and half social.
You're doomed. Doomed to contradiction.
So what does that psychological failure look like? What's the outcome of that constant tug of war?
You become what he dismissively calls the Dutzenmensch.
Dutzenmensch. What does that mean, literally?
It translates to something like a dozen men, or just an ordinary, uncommitted person. He lists the examples he sees around him: a Frenchman, an Englishman, a bourgeois.
People who are stuck.
Stuck between their innate impulses and their social duties, never fully committing to either their natural self or their social role. The result is they become nothing.
Nothing.
No firm identity, no purpose, because they are perpetually wrestling with themselves. It's a life lost to inner conflict.
So to truly be something, he says you have to commit to one master.
Decisively, either to nature or to the fatherland.
This radical idea, it leads to his astonishing claim about the death of the traditional citizen. He states, very baldly, that public education exists no more and can no longer exist.
Yeah, and he's so certain of that impossibility because he argues that the moral prerequisite for it is just gone.
And that prerequisite is?
A unified fatherland, a national moral purpose where the individual's identity is absolutely subsumed by the collective, like in ancient Sparta or Rome.
And since modern states lack that,
They cannot produce true citizens.
he reserves particular scorn for the schools and colleges of his day.
Oh, absolutely. He views them as producing Stutterwesen.
Another great term, hybrid creatures.
Hybrid creatures, exactly. People who live a sort of double life. They appear to relate everything to others, they perform their social duties, but internally, they only care for themselves.
And since everyone else is doing the same thing,
The entire social charade is a lost effort. They gain nothing from it but inner conflict. So the only paths left are either a total return to nature or this intensively controlled domestic education he's about to lay out.
since domestic education is the only feasible route, he moves right to the holy duty of parents. He basically lays the foundation of his moral universe on the mother's lap.
He really does. He argues that the mother's first and holiest duty is to nurse her own children. This is a point of absolute conviction for Rousseau,
And a neglect of this duty is the root of everything wrong.
the root of all other misfortune, the breakdown of the entire moral order. If the mother delegates this duty, she delegates affection, and that initial natural bond is just severed.
This paints a picture where moral failure begins right there, in the nursery.
If the mother refuses to nurse and the father refuses to educate, sending the child away to school, the child develops no affection for the paternal home. They transfer it elsewhere, and they return as an emotionally detached stranger.
Which brings us to the father's role, the educator. He knows the ideal tutor is rare, but he makes a pretty revolutionary claim here.
He does. He says a father, even one of limited knowledge, would be a better educator than the world's most skillful teacher.
That seems counterintuitive. Why would an amateur parent beat a professional?
It all comes down to emotional investment, what he calls zeal.
Zeal.
He says zeal will replace talent sooner than talent will replace zeal. The passion, the unwavering commitment, the singular focus of a parent that supersedes mere technical skill.
So it's about love, not pedagogy.
Exactly. This education is based on love, not on professional detachment. And that love ensures a consistency that's more important than, say, encyclopedic knowledge.
So we have the guiding philosophy and the committed tutor. Now we meet the subject of the entire work, Emile.
Yes, Emile. And it's vital that he's not a genius. He's a typical boy.
Right, because the model has to be universal.
Exactly. The exceptional child, Rousseau says, educates themselves. It is the common, average person who requires this specific, reproducible method.
Okay, so before we even get to the classroom, Rousseau inserts this. Well, it's a pretty controversial aside about the environment. He claims location dictates development.
He does, and this is a point we have to address as, an aspect of 18th century bias embedded in the source material. We're relaying his viewpoint here, not endorsing it.
Because of course.
He claims that the country has a decisive influence. He argues that only temperate zones, and he specifically names places like France, allow humans to reach their highest development.
And the extremes of climate are detrimental.
To both body and mind, yes. He goes on to state that neither the Negroes nor the Laplanders can compete with Europeans in understanding based on what he calls the supposed imperfections of their cerebral organization due to climate.
That is a stark, environmentally determined claim of superiority. It's a good reminder that even revolutionary thinkers are products of their time.
Very much so. But we can move from that to his practical focus, which is health. He argues the body and soul are fundamentally linked.
A weak body also weakens the soul.
Absolutely. And tied to this, he expresses a profound, almost total suspicion of formal medicine.
He calls it more dangerous to man than all the ills it claims to cure.
That's the one. He really distrusted doctors.
Why is such disdain for the profession?
He claims that doctors, while they might heal the body, they kill the courage of the individual.
How so?
He attributes cowardice, faint-heartedness, gullibility, and fear of death directly to medical practice. It breeds dependency and anxiety. For him, the only useful part of medical science is health doctrine.
Which is less a science and more a virtue.
Right. It's a virtue of self-control.
And what are these two true virtues, or as he calls them, the two true doctors?
Mäßigkeit und Arbeit, moderation and labor.
Moderation and labor.
Labor sharpens the appetite and strengthens the body. Moderation prevents you from abusing that appetite. The whole goal is to make the body robust enough to withstand illness without external aid.
So the child must first learn how to be sick.
Exactly. to bear suffering quietly, naturally, and patiently, trusting that nature will do the healing, much like animals do.
Once we establish that physical robustness, we move to the core of this early education, establishing independence through freedom. I love the central paradoxical rule he establishes for infants.
It's the cornerstone of anti-dependency. It's fantastic. Keine Gewohnheit zu haben, muss des Kindes einzige Gewohnheit sein.
The child's only habit must be to have no habit.
That's it. Any fixed routine or custom, no matter how small, begins to form a chain of arbitrary dependency.
So he rejects fixed times for sleeping or eating or always being carried on one arm.
All of it. And especially physical constraints. No bonnets, no swaddling bands, no tight clothes, anything that restricts the limbs and prevents them from strengthening naturally.
He even says to let the child fall 100 times a day.
Yes, because every time the child falls, he learns to stand up sooner. And the experience of freedom, the joy of spontaneous movement that outweighs many wounds. The goal is self-mastery, both physical and mental.
This principle of freedom brings us to the most foundational pedagogical rule, the one that must replace arbitrary human authority.
This is the law of necessity, and the rule is absolute. Never command. If you must restrict the child, authority should be replaced by the heavy yoke of necessity.
What does he mean by that? The constraints of the physical world.
The constraints of the physical world or the natural consequences of actions. Crucially, never the whims of men.
That seems like a subtle but hugely important distinction. Can we break that down? The difference between the whims of man and the constraints of things.
It's a difference between morality and physics, really. When a father forbids a child from touching something just because he says so, and the child disobeys, the punishment, a slap, a reprimand, it's arbitrary, it's subjective.
The child just learns obedience.
Yeah.
Or how to get away with it.
Exactly. It creates a dynamic of tyranny and deceit. But contrast that with the law of necessity.
Right.
If Emile, in a fit of roughness, breaks the windows of his room, the tutor doesn't scold him. He doesn't punish him.
He just lets him get cold.
He lets Emile endure the consequences, the cold wind, the drafts. The cold and the wind aren't moralizing, they're just the inevitable result of breaking glass.
So Emil learns that disrespecting physical law brings suffering.
And, crucially, he learns this without creating dependency on human will or learning to fear a subjective tyrant. He learns the necessary law of the world.
That immediately shifts the accountability onto the world itself. I mean, it sounds almost cruel, but it's fundamentally about teaching reality.
It is the ultimate lesson in reality. And the absence of this, according to Rousseau, creates the miserable, spoiled child. He notes that weakness combined with dominance creates only folly and misery.
He talks about the rich children he observes who are used to having every command obeyed instantly.
And when they finally enter the world, they find universal resistance. The sheer weight of reality, where people do not cater to their every whim, it just crushes their childish vanity.
They become miserable.
Miserable because they mistake their position. They think they're masters of the world when they're actually just slaves to their own expectations. Rousseau's entire early strategy is a shield against that.
This massive undertaking of shielding and strengthening is why he defines this early stage as purely negative preparation.
That's the key concept. The first education must be purely negative. It's not about implanting virtue or teaching abstract truth. It is about preventing the introduction of error and vice.
The tutor's job is to clear the ground, not to sow the seeds.
Perfectly put.
And what does he claim is the greatest success of this negative approach?
If the tutor can successfully keep the child healthy until age 12, without him being able to distinguish his right hand from his left.
Meaning without filling his mind with premature arbitrary ideas.
Right. Then his understanding will open naturally to reason without prejudices. This intentional delay, this prevention of societal ideas, is the greatest time saver. It sets the stage for true, independent thought.
That is such a powerful point.
It really is.
Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoy this podcast.
So we're at age 12. The groundwork is laid. Now what?
Welcome back to our deep dive into Emile. Our natural man has reached age 12, mentally unburdened, physically robust, and grounded in the law of necessity. Now we enter the second phase, the ages of strength and utility, where learning shifts entirely to the senses and experience.
This stage is governed by the senses and the limbs, which Rousseau calls the tools of our understanding. The focus shifts to developing intellectual power through the body.
So if the boy can't properly use his senses, he'll never properly use his mind.
That's the logic. And this leads to the development of what he calls the sixth sense, or the Gemeinsinn.
We would translate this as common sense, but it sounds like Rousseau means something very specific, very philosophical by it.
He does. Gemeinsinn is not some spiritual revelation. It doesn't have a single organ. It arises purely from the proper, coordinated use of all the other senses working together.
It's a synthesis.
It's the faculty that synthesizes sensory information. Its internal perceptions become ideas. And the art of comparing and coordinating those ideas, that's human reason.
So reason is essentially a refined form of sensory processing.
Exactly. So if you're intellectually weak at this stage, it's not because you lacked books, it's because you lacked robust, varied, and accurate sensory experience.
His thinking must not extend beyond what his eyes can see.
Or what his body can measure. The senses are the mind's guide.
This absolutely requires a total rejection of abstract book learning.
Oh, a total rejection of traditional schooling. He says learning abstract concepts through books is useless, even harmful. It dissociates the concept from reality.
He has that famous example about geography maps.
Yes. The child who learns geography from maps ends up believing that cities exist nowhere else but on that piece of paper. The education must be physical. It must be factual.
No other book than the world. No other instruction than facts.
That's the mantra for this whole period.
But the tutor has to guide these facts. This is the stage where the tutor transitions from just preventing error to actively directing utility-based learning. And this transition is marked by a famous and pretty embarrassing anecdote.
The wax duck experiment. This is a pivotal scene.
And so set the scene for us.
Emile and the tutor visit a fair, and they're astonished by a conjurer who makes a wax duck swim and follow a piece of bread.
Which is actually a trick using unseen magnets.
Right, but they don't know that. They're amazed. They go home and try to replicate it themselves with bread and water, and they fail spectacularly. It reveals their profound lack of knowledge of, physics.
And the conjurer, who Rousseau cleverly names Johann Jakob, he shows up and administers this powerful rebuke, not to the boy, but to the tutor.
That's the twist. Johann Jakob, the common man, appears the next morning complaining that they tried to copy his trick and ruin his livelihood. But more importantly, he tells the tutor that the older person's experience must serve as an authority to the child.
He chides him. "You, my sir, why did you let him commit it?"
As the older, it is your duty to assist him with advice and deed. The message is so clear. The tutor can't just stand back anymore and let natural consequences happen.
He has a duty to anticipate the dangers and guide the boy before the errors occur.
This is the turning point. The education transitions from pure negativity to active, positive direction based on utility. The seriousness of the teacher has to replace that comradely compliance.
So this focus on utility means that any lesson learned must have a practical, demonstrable value. How does Emile learn something as abstract as the concept of property in this system?
Through a deeply sensory experience. Emile and the tutor, they select a plot of land and they plant beans. They invest time, sweat, labor. And the tutor tells Emile, this is your property, defining property as investing time, labor, and self into the land. That establishes their right to it.
But then they return and find that someone else, Johann Jakob again, master of consequences, has planted melons there and ruined their beans.
And Emile is distraught, he's angry, he's claiming injustice, but the tutor forces him to acknowledge Johann Jakob's prior claim.
He was there first.
He had invested his time and labor first, so Emile learns that property isn't a random grant. It's a commitment of self to the land, and you have to respect the prior claims of others. He learns the social contract through disappointment, not a lecture.
The ultimate intellectual result of this phase is practical reason. And the physical result is preparation for an unpredictable future. The mandate for a manual trade. A handwork.
This is non-negotiable for Rousseau. Emile must learn a manual trade.
Why? For freedom.
To ensure his personal freedom and independence. If fortune turns, if he loses his wealth, his status, he must always be able to earn his bread honestly. It keeps a man from becoming a slave of opinion.
This leads Rousseau into some of his most pointed social and economic critique, doesn't it? He says economic value is often inversely related to true utility.
It's a profound observation on vanity and status. He notes that the useful arts, baking, carpentry, things necessary for life, they yield the least profit.
Because everyone needs them, so they have to be affordable.
Right. Conversely, the specialized arts for the idle, rich artists, gilders, actors, they set arbitrary high prices.
And the core value of those luxury items is often derived solely from the fact that the poor cannot afford them. It's about exclusivity.
Precisely. This is the vanity he wants to avoid. He quotes the Latin phrase, nolo habere bona, nisi quibus populus inviderit.
I only want to possess goods that the common people envy.
That's the definition of luxury consumption, owning things for their status. So the trade for Emile must be useful and honest. Rousseau famously suggests a shoemaker over a poet. Manual labor ensures a life lived in health, truth, and moral rectitude.
Okay, we've completed the first two phases. Emile is now 15, physically capable, grounded in utility, and possesses only true, factual knowledge. Now he faces what Rousseau calls the most violent and terrible need that awakens at puberty.
The passions, the need for connection. This is where the focus shifts from the utility of things to the morality of man.
It's a volatile transition.
Extremely. From 12 to 15, his strength grew faster than his needs, so he was self-sufficient. Now his needs are exploding because of desire and passion. The body is ready, but the soul is vulnerable.
This is where he has to move from self-love, amour de soi, to a love of humanity.
A very tricky and dangerous move.
Let's start with an old problem revisited, honesty. How does this new social pressure affect his propensity to lie?
Rousseau maintains that lying about facts, what happened in the past, is unnatural. It's caused by the law of obedience.
If a child is forced to obey an arbitrary command, he'll find a secret way around it.
Which requires deceit. Since Emile has been free from arbitrary commands, he has no habit of deceit. The solution is to keep him independent of others' opinions. That kills the interest in lying. He has nothing to hide, so he won't lie.
But now he has to relate to others. How does this independent man begin to form connections and understand suffering outside himself?
The first social feeling he develops is mitleid, compassion or pity. And Rousseau explores this deeply. He argues we only suffer as much as we truly believe the other person suffers. This requires imagination. We have to be able to identify with the suffering creature, step out of ourselves, and project our feelings onto them.
Before the imagination awakens at this age, a child can't genuinely feel empathy.
That's his argument. So the tutor's role must now be to systematically expand the boy's imagination to cultivate this compassion.
How do they do that practically?
The youth must be exposed to objects that expand the heart. Humanity, goodness, charity. So he's exposed to real-life situations, the struggles of the poor, the demands of a working man, so he can relate his own destiny to that of others.
And conversely, avoid things that shrink the heart.
Right. Envy, avarice, hatred, anything that pushes him back into self-centeredness.
This shaping of the soul leads us to the choice of reading material. We know Rousseau is wary of books, so what's his curriculum for studying man and society?
He finds history as a genre pretty unreliable.
Why?
Because it's inevitably distorted by the writer's prejudices, and critically, it only focuses on nations that are falling apart. Eras of war, upheaval, drama. The most stable, best governments, he says, are often spoken of least because they're tranquil.
So history is just a record of human madness.
Mostly, yes. Which is why biography is preferred over history.
Because it focuses more on decisions than events.
It reveals the inner workings of the subject, why they chose a certain path. Rousseau praises Plutarch for his methodology, which uses minute details, like the story of the great Spartan general Agesilaus riding a hobby horse with his children.
Why is that small detail so important?
Because it characterizes the man, not just the general. It offers insight into his humanity, his private life. It's the kind of detail that allows Emile to truly identify with the subject as a man, which fosters compassion, rather than just memorizing battles.
And he also allows fables at this age.
Yes, because the youth's judgment is strong enough to handle them now. Fables offer instruction without causing offense, by concealing the guilty under a foreign mask, the fox, the crow, the wolf.
But the wisdom has to be implied.
Always. The student must have the pleasure of discovering the moral himself. The tutor's cardinal sin is to spoil the fable by adding an obvious moral statement at the end. That just removes the whole intellectual exercise.
Moving from the social to the spiritual, we enter the most famous digression in the entire work, the Savoyard vicar's profession of faith.
This is the moment Emile's spiritual foundation is established, and it's all based on reason and nature, not doctrine.
The vicar serves as his guide.
A guide offering his sincere, simple, non-dogmatic beliefs. He dismisses the chaos of philosophy and says he found truth not in complex arguments, but when his heart was illuminated by a new light found in nature.
So what are the first dogmas derived purely from observation and reason?
He begins with two conclusions about the physical world. First, observing motion, he argues that the world must be moved by a powerful, non-material will. Matter itself is passive and dead, so motion has to come from an external active source.
Okay. And the second?
Second, observing the regular, uniform movements, the planets, the harmony of life, he concludes this can't be random chance. It demonstrates an intelligent will or Verstand, an understanding, that directs the entire order.
The classic argument from design.
The harmony of the whole is the greatest miracle proving a divine intelligence.
He also tackles the dualism of substance. How does he distinguish between matter and soul?
He posits two eternal principles: matter, which is passive and dead, and the spirit or soul, which is active and free. Matter can't think. Thinking, willing, choosing, that defines the free being. The source of every action, therefore, lies in the will of a free being.
This emphasis on free will brings us to the most powerful, most quoted section of his faith, the definition of conscience.
Yes. And conscience, for Rousseau, is not some learned social mechanism. It is the direct connection between man and the divine.
He calls it the divine instinct.
The eternal and celestial voice, the infallible judge of good and evil. It is what elevates man and makes him godlike. It's the innate voice guiding us toward moral action.
If it's an eternal voice, why do people in society seem to ignore it or lose it?
He believes society and prejudice silence this natural voice. Conscience is described as shy, loving peace and solitude. It's easily overwhelmed by the noise of the world, by vanity, by social demands.
So Emile's entire education was designed to keep that inner voice audible.
To keep it clear.
This natural faith makes the vicar skeptical of mandatory belief in specific historical revelations or dogmas.
His skepticism is rooted in divine justice. He finds it incompatible with God's righteousness to punish people for being unwillingly ignorant, for not having access to specific books or understanding complex theology.
So what every human must know should be universally accessible.
Meaning it must be derived from nature and reason, not restricted to written texts that many people will never see or understand.
Yet despite this skepticism, the vicar reserves this intense, profound admiration for Jesus and the gospel.
He is genuinely moved by the moral majesty and holiness of the gospel. He compares the death of Socrates to the death of Jesus. Socrates dies peacefully, like a great sage.
Right.
Jesus dies agonizingly, reviled and tormented. And the vicar concludes the difference is so vast that if Socrates lived and died as a sage, Jesus lived and died as a god.
But he still has reservations.
He acknowledges the gospel also contains incredible things that contradict reason. So his final stance is one of humble reverence and silence before the incomprehensible. Simple, nature-based devotion over theological conflict.
And what is the final spiritual charge given to the young man?
He must never disputerin.
Why not?
Because disputing leads to passion, vanity, and the loss of sincerity. The core duty is to be sincere with himself and follow his conscience. That is how he remains unified within himself, the true result of the entire education.
So Emile is now ready for the world, armed with a strong body, a practical mind, a clear conscience. The fifth and final book introduces his necessary companion, Sophie.
And this section, perhaps more than any other, has generated intense controversy because it immediately rejects everything established for Emile.
We should be clear that we're analyzing Rousseau's specific views here, recognizing they reflect the social paradigms of his time.
Absolutely. He establishes right away that because men and women are fundamentally different in temperament and character, they cannot and must not have the same education.
He assigns the woman a very specific and very restrictive purpose.
He argues that the woman is especially created to please the man and submit to him. This is the natural order. Her strength lies not in physical power or independence, but in her charms, her ability to sway the man's will through attraction.
Which means her primary concern must be the opinion of others.
Exactly. The total opposite of Emile's education. His training was about eliminating dependency on external opinion. But the girl's nature is to care deeply for the opinion of others. Her reputation is her currency.
So does this imply that Sophie is meant to be ignorant? A mere maid?
No, not at all. She must be able to think, judge, and acquire knowledge. But this knowledge is ultimately subservient to her role as a companion.
She needs to be a witty, charming conversationalist.
To manage, influence, and counsel her husband, not oppose him intellectually.
And what is the foremost virtue he prescribes for a woman?
Sanftmet. Gentleness or meekness.
Why is that so crucial?
Because she is destined to obey an imperfect being, the husband. She must learn to endure injustice and harshness without complaint. Arguing, he says, only exacerbates her suffering and loses her power of influence. Gentleness is her weapon.
And practical skills. Does she learn a trade like Emile?
Her labor is domestic. He says girls naturally enjoy needlework and domestic activities, and this should be encouraged. In terms of appearance, they naturally love adornment, but they must be taught taste, to value natural beauty over expensive ornamentation like diamonds or lace.
So we have the man of nature, Emile, and his natural companion, Sophie, the woman designed to complement him. What is the ultimate result of this incredibly controlled education when Emile finally steps into the world?
Emile is presented as a man who is simple, unassuming, and completely authentic. He doesn't strive to shine or demonstrate artificial advantage. He values utility, truth, genuine connection over arbitrary markers like wit or lineage.
He's a good man, not a successful courtier.
That's the goal. He remains himself, free from pretense.
But the world is full of wealth and luxury, which Rousseau detests. What if Emile were to become rich?
His entire education protects him. Even if he inherits great wealth, his ingrained sense of utility would prevent him from indulging in ridiculous extravagance. His core principles, rooted in labor and necessity, ensure he remains a man of principle, not a slave of opinion.
He would choose shared pleasures over solitary ones.
Right. A simple outdoor feast with friends over some expensive indulgence. Rousseau notes that enjoyment claimed solely for oneself is the death of pleasure. Emile remains true to his nature, regardless of his circumstances.
This has been an absolutely comprehensive analysis. To bring this deep dive to a close, let's quickly consolidate the central statements, the lasting takeaways from this philosophy.
Okay. First, I think we have to remember the foundational imperative of negative education, delaying instruction and actively preserving the child from prejudice until age 12.
Second, that crucial principle of learning through necessity. The child should only be constrained by the force of things, the physical world, never the arbitrary whims of men.
Third, the importance of manual labor, the handwork, for ensuring personal independence, moral rectitude, and as a hedge against the fickle nature of fortune.
And fourth, the reliance on the inner voice of conscience as that divine instinct, the ultimate natural moral guide that transcends dogma and social pressure.
Rousseau undertook a monumental task, really, to forge a truly independent man of nature who could exist in society without succumbing to its dependencies. And I think we are left with this enduring challenge for our own lives today.
Which is?
Is it truly possible to live fully in the world, to observe its folly, to participate in it, and yet remain detached and unblemished by its constraints? What fine balance must we strike between cultivating our natural, authentic self and fulfilling our demanding social obligations?
That is a question we leave for you to explore as you navigate your own life.
A perfect place to end.
That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you for joining us.